Hello, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in again today. It's a real pleasure to talk today about some of the interesting aspects of migraine. I've talked in my previous videos about what exactly migraine is, and today I want to talk about what I've titled What Exactly is Migraine Part 2. Thank you so much for making out time to watch regularly. For those of you who've been watching, and for those who are watching for the very first time, I'm Dr. John Oluwole. I'm a specialist neurologist in the United Arab Emirates, and I created this channel to create awareness about brain disorders and how best to live with it in order to not necessarily suffer dire consequences from the disorders. So I talk about disorders such as migraine, dizziness, headaches, seizures, and so many other things. So encourage you to please subscribe so you can benefit from all of the offerings from this channel. So today I'll be talking about other things that has to do with migraine. So I've defined previously the migraine is a primary disorder in which people who have it have recurrent headaches without underlying brain disease. So today I'll talk about some of the interesting things about migraine. Like I mentioned before, that it's an inherent tendency to have recurrent headaches, but there's no underlying brain disease. So migraine affects about 1.3 billion people on the planet. So that tells you about the scale of the problem. So it affects about a quarter of the world population. And women, of course, are more affected than men. At least 1 out of every 5 women has got migraine, and 1 out of every 10 men have got migraine. So the proportion is about 2 to 1. Migraine affects adults more commonly, but of course, children are not left out of it. Literature has reported people as young as 4 starting to have features of migraine. And for the commonest period in life when it tends to start is in the teenage years after puberty, from about the age of 12, 13 down towards 20 and towards 30s and so on and so forth. And some people even start to have their headaches towards the age of 40. It will be very, very uncommon for someone without previous history of headaches to develop migraine after the age of 45 or 50. When I see that, it can happen. I've seen a man in his 70s who came for help with symptoms suggestive of migraine, but of course it's had this headache onset much earlier, probably several decades ahead. So it's very unusual to have someone coming down with migraine features for the first time after the age of 50. That's really very uncommon. When we see that, then we really want to investigate very thoroughly to be sure we're not missing anything else. Now, there are 2 forms of migraine. There is the migraine with aura, and there is the migraine without aura. Aura is the warning symptom that people feel before migraine headaches start. And the majority of people who suffer migraine do not have aura. So there is a good number of people who tend to have aura before their migraines begin. And aura is the warning symptom that people tend to have before the headache starts. The commonest form of aura I have seen, and probably that's the commonest globally, and that's the visual aura. It's a kind of visual disturbance that people have just before their headaches begin. Some people could observe that on one side of the visual field, there is some blurring of vision. Some people even report complete loss of vision, which tends to reverse as the headache starts or kicks in, or much later as the headache goes on. Some people will describe seeing black spots with shimmering light around it. Some people describe seeing zigzag lines. Some people describe seeing flashes of light in some aspects of the visual fields. just before their headaches begin. And that's what we call aura. That's a visual form of aura. And there are other forms of aura that migraine sufferers can experience. The other one is the sensory aura, in which some people could have some tingling on one side of their arm, or on one leg, or one side of the body, one part of the face, and what have you. So all of us tend to precede the headache, or could even happen while the headache is already going on and then tends to resolve. And then the other one I have seen, which can be very dramatic, is what we call the motor aura. And that's one in which you have sudden paralysis on one side of the body, and that can be very, very alarming for those who are experiencing it for the very first time. And of course, the physicians often have to investigate it to ensure that it's not a stroke or some other things that are mimicking migraine. But of course, we've seen that before. I've seen at least two or three patients who came with weakness on one side of their bodies uh, as a component of their migraine attack, and that resolved over time. I know it can even last up to 7 days. So that's what we call hemiplegic migraine. That's another form of aura of migraine. The other form of migraine, which can also be very, very, alarming, is speech disturbance. I know of some patients who come and say, for the very first time, they just observed they couldn't express themselves. They wanted to call on the phone, they couldn't say anything, they couldn't read, they couldn't make out what people were saying to them. And that tends to reverse as the headache kicks in or resolves. So that's a kind of aura of migraine as well. We call that a kind of language aura. So that can happen as part of migraine manifestations. And then the other things worth saying about migraine is the variability of behavior of migraine, both between individuals and in a given individual. So no two migraine sufferers are the same. You could have one migraine sufferer who visits the hospital or the emergency department, from week to week because of very disabling and troubling migraines, incapacitating migraines, and they needing infusions and all of that. And you could have some other persons who just have headaches once in a while, and they can take care of their headaches. They're not so bad at all. So that tells you about the variability of migraines. So it's not a one-cap-fits-all phenomenon. Similarly, in a given patient, their headaches could be, very frequent at some point in their lives, and then at some other time it becomes less frequent. So it's a variable disease, and that's how it tends to behave. The natural evolution is it tends to change its course. It's common, it's frequent at some point. It tends to kind of remit at some other point. And generally speaking, as people grow older, into their 50s and 60s and so on and so forth, the migraine tends to get less and less severe. Right, and the last thing to say about migraine is to talk about what I have called the phases of migraine. The fact that we could look at migraine in about 3 or 4 different phases. We have a headache phase, in which people get the typical attacks of migraine, and that's what everyone knows about. And of course, sometimes there can be an aura preceding the migraine, and I've described what an aura is. And we can also have something we call the prodromal phase of migraine, prodrome. So some patients have observed that just about a day or two before their headaches, they tend to start to yawn, they start feeling tired, their behavior changes, they start to crave certain foods like chocolate or what have you, and then that leads into their headaches. And that's what we call the prodromal phase of migraine. And even after the headache has resolved, there's also what we call the postdrome of migraine, in which some people feel drenched, tired, and unable to focus, after the headache must have resolved, and that tends to, go away, after a day or two, after which the headache must have resolved. So this is all I have to offer today. Thank you all for watching, and I do hope you enjoyed it and you learned something. And if you did, please leave a comment behind in the comment section. And please, if you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Please hit the subscribe button, subscribe so you can benefit from everything that this channel has got to offer. And please share with your colleagues. You may never know whose life you might be helping positively, by sharing the video. So thank you so much for watching once again. Have a very lovely, weekend, and see you in my next video. And please stay safe. Bye.